let me get this straight. You post a meme. They call it misinformation. You ask a question, suddenly you're dangerous. You quote a scientist, bam! Fact checked by some TikTok activist with a laptop. They call it community guidelines. I call it what it is, censorship. That's why I built Pickaxe, a platform that doesn't just talk about free speech, we guarantee it. No algorithms choking your reach, no shadow bans, no, oops, you offended the regime emails. Pickaxe gives you freedom of speech and freedom of reach. Because free speech without reach, that's just shouting into a void. We don't need less speech, we need more. Debate it, share it, argue like Americans again. Pickaxe. We're not here to play nice with the system, we're here to tear it down with the truth. Sign up at pickaxe.com today.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised.
You know, once you appoint yourself an arbiter of what's true and what's not true, then there's really no end to the power that you have now assumed for yourself.
They are implementing this massive brainwashing attempt to hijack everybody. Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Jeff Dornik Show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure that you guys, wherever you guys are watching this, we're live on Getter, on X, on Rumble, on Pickaxe, but make sure that you guys are going to two places primarily. Go subscribe to the show on Rumble by going and you can either subscribe to my personal channel, which is Jeff Dornik Unfiltered, or look up Maverick Broadcasting Network, which is the network that we air the show on. So make sure you guys are subscribing there, that we guys can join in the live chat, ask questions, all of that. But as well, go over to pickaxe.com, which is the social media platform that I recently launched. We are rolling out with the app here very, very soon. So right now it's web-based only. Go over to pickaxe.com and sign up today. And the main reason why you want to do that is you guys can actually experience true freedom of speech and freedom of reach. And we've got a whole bunch of monetization opportunities for content creators. We were bringing out an email newsletter. We're going to give you more direct access to your audience, more direct access to your favorite creators, especially Rumble creators. So make sure that you guys are going over there to pickaxe.com. It's pickax.com. And then before I bring on our guests as well, just want to bring up our sponsor as well, which is Rakuten. And the main reason why we've been pushing them a lot is because of inflation. And it's been very, very difficult because, prices are skyrocketing whenever you're shopping. And so the best thing that you guys can actually do is go to jeffdornik.com/cash and sign up for free for Rakuten. The main reason is because you're going to get discounts when you guys are shopping online, and you guys can earn cash back as well. You sign up absolutely free. There's no fee. There's no charge, nothing like that. It's absolutely free. Go to jeffdornik.com/cash. You guys can sign up today. And then that's also one way that you guys can help support the show is by doing that. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and bring on our guest for today. We're going to bring on Michael Maxsenti to the show, and he's actually running for Congress out here in my neck of the woods. So, Michael, welcome to the show. And you may have to unmute yourself there, but welcome to the show. I'm glad we can sit down here and chat for a bit.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Looking forward to it. Whereabouts do you live here in Southern California?
I'm out here in Newport Beach. I used to live up in my wife and I used to live up in West Hollywood, and then we escaped the craziness up there, and we're down here in the great beach city of Newport Beach.
Well, I'm smiling because you're in my district that I'm running for Congress. You didn't know that. I didn't know it until just now either. So I'm running here in California for the Congressional District 47, which encompasses all of Irvine, Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach, and part of Seal Beach. And it's the 47th district that was redistricted a few years ago from District 45. So I'm glad you're a constituent.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, we've definitely got to get the right people, the right people in office, and especially too because I feel like not only a lot of times are we taking on the Democrats as conservatives and Republicans out here, but a lot of times historically, I would argue that we've had to tackle the kind of more apathetic, GOP that's out here in Southern California. Luckily, I like Will O'Neill, who just recently took over the OC GOP. He was great through COVID and all that kind of stuff. And I've always liked Will, so I'm happy that he's kind of leading the OC GOP out here. But what's been the response from even the party itself and just Republicans in general out here after you announced that you were running for Congress?
Well, I echo what you just said about Will O'Neill, and I'm delighted with Will's new leadership. Because there were some reasons why the Republican Party has lost its footing here in Orange County, but Will is correcting that. And there's new leadership at the state level. And so the reaction has been as good as I could have hoped for, because I'm not a career politician. I have not worked my way up inside of the leadership of the local party or the state party. Although I was made a delegate and went to the California State Convention as a Republican. And I jokingly said to a number of people, I think I might even have said it to Will, that I don't think there's anybody here who's had a bigger gap from the last time I was a delegate. I was a delegate to that convention in 1993. So 32 years later, I came back to the Republican Party at that convention. And I'm excited about the new leadership. And Will, I think, exemplifies that. And that is a commitment to build a truly big tent populist movement that represents the people and recognizes, and this is one of the things I look forward to being on your show, because you clearly understand the vastness of the forces that we're up against. And I try to tell people it's not Republican against Democrat. It's we the people, ladies and gentlemen. It's we the people against the corrupt establishment that has gotten a hold of it. I left the Republican Party after people like Dick Cheney and Bush hijacked it, took it away from the party of Lincoln, the party of principles. But now, with the new unity government that is trying to be built under the leadership of Trump, when he and Kennedy came together, they exemplified what Abraham Lincoln did to get us through the Civil War. And people will say, well, Trump has these tremendously diverse people on his cabinet, and that's right. And you know what? During the cabinet meetings that they've had open, he listens to them. And Kennedy and Trump, when they joined forces, that was one of the reasons why when I made the decision after the election to rejoin that Republican Party, to help be a part of bringing this Republican Party to the forefront of a representation of the original principles of Lincoln and what the party stood for, and why I was a Republican for most all of my life, and to help build that.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think that we need more people with that kind of mentality, because I can't tell you how many people that I've interviewed, running for office, where they always talk, there's this talking point about, obviously, about we're taking on the establishment, but a lot of times when I talk to people, it's like they don't really understand what they're going up against, and it's like, but are you really taking on the establishment, or are you just repeating a talking point, right? Because it's like, I see these guys, and I've interviewed a whole host of them, and then they go to DC, and clearly they have no idea what they're doing, because then they just start capitulating to Mike Johnson, and before that, Kevin McCarthy, and all these guys, and you're just sitting here like, so are you taking on the establishment, or are you not? So with you, it's like, how do we know? Like, you actually understand who are we taking on when we're talking about this?
Well, that's a great question. And I try to define quickly for people the establishment. And I define the establishment quite simply as every individual, institution, or corporation that has taken advantage of the American people of the planet, and our environment and our Mother Earth. Any of those people, that's who I lump into the establishment. And that includes everybody from the Bilderberg institution to the World Economic Forum, down to those people in the departments of our government. that knowingly looked the other way and allowed decisions to be made and regulations to be written that knowingly were going to allow corporations or individuals to make significant amounts of money, totally disregarding the health of our people, our environment, etc. So to me, those are people that they were either inept or corrupt, or there is a third part. Some of them recognized they were locked in a bad system and they had a choice to make because they had to put food on the table for their families. And so they were caught in between a rock and a hard place where they had a choice to make. Do I keep my job and do what I have to do, as much as it was difficult for them to swallow? So there is that third group.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of those things. I think a lot of people, they try to make everything black or white, and there is a certain level of gray in a lot of these issues, because there's a lot of people that it's like in their mind they didn't have another choice in order except to compromise, because they have to provide for their families. And it's like, luckily for me, whether you're talking about COVID or whatever it is, I never put myself in that kind of a position to where I've had to make that compromise. But also now, as a father, where I've got a 3-year-old son now, it's like I can understand why somebody would compromise. And so it's, while on one hand you're like, you shouldn't morally, but on the flip side you're like, I get why people do it. Whether you're talking about COVID or whether you're talking about people in the agencies or people in the government, why they end up kind of caving a bit is because they're trying to make sure that they have job stability and they take care of their family and and all that kind of stuff.
You made me smile when you said you had a 3-year-old, and yesterday I got to feel some of the first kicks of my 4th grandchild, and the first one for my son yesterday, not far from you, at Father's Day, and looking forward to our 4th grandchild. But when my son came along late in life, the mother of my children, we had lost. I'm a stepfather. She was 5 years old when her mother and I got together, but I raised her lovingly, and I always think of her as my daughter and never will think of her anything less. But when I was gifted late in life with a son, that's when I made a choice to leave the corporate world. And let me give a quick background, if you will, for people, because I think it's important when they see somebody who's not come up through the ranks of the Republican Party or any party, and they go, well, who is this guy? So just real briefly, first and foremost, I'm a beach guy. My grandparents are raised in Hermosa Beach. My mom went to Redondo High. I was born in the South Bay. I've lived along the ocean. I went to San Diego State. I went down there originally to play some football. I moved here into this district 50 years ago. And I've lived and worked in this district, built 3 businesses in this district. And my business background is, real quickly, as I was given the opportunity to turn around a division of American Standard. And at 33, I was made the youngest president of a division of American Standard, with the task of turning around a 93-year-old company at that point and make it profitable again. I did so within a year, but it wasn't because I knew so much about the overall industry. I'd come up through marketing and sales. But what I did know what to do was to have a company-wide retreat where we had 240 employees from our Orange County, Costa Mesa plant and our San Diego plant come together. And I said, look, folks, I've been here for 8 years. And for 8 years, I've heard this is the way we've always done it. And I said, I challenge you from this moment on. If this is the way we've always done it, now the challenge is, what have we learned? How do we make it better? What do we need to change? We rewrote all the operating procedures. A year later, the company was profitable again. A year into the second year of profitability, I got remembered and taught a lesson in corporate hierarchy, because when I was vice president of sales, and one of these famous Wharton School graduates who thought every business you could run from a financial statement, after they'd taken one of the most highly profitable companies in the nation, which is why they bought it, and in 4 years they'd taken that highly profitable company and from running it from a financial statement forced us into making changes that ultimately took us into a loss. And at one of the meetings when we were struggling with these changes they were forcing on us, I said to the VP of operations for the division, this is wrong, da 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 da. The room was silent, and after the meeting, the president, who was another executive from a business school, famous business school that I'll leave unnamed, said, Maxsenti, you got to learn the corporate game. He'll never forget that. You called him out. Everybody in the room knew you were right, but you called him out and weren't willing to just do what he said the way he said to do it. So in the second year of profitability, he summarily fired me and brought in a guy from a plumbing company to run one of the highest quality printing companies in the nation. 4 years later, they were sold because they went back to losing money and never been heard of since. And then I was the COO of a joint venture for Nissan Corporation with the highest quality printer in Japan, where they wanted to create the finest printing company in the world. And I was hired after a nationwide search to head that up. But again, I didn't know some infinite amount of wisdom. But what I did know was, okay, one of the things that we can do, since you're the highest quality in manufacturing in Japan, let's do some cultural exchanges. And we exchanged crews from our different departments and would send them to Japan, and they'd take their crews, send them to us, and we would learn from each other. We did that. And within a year, that company was competing at the highest levels nationally in the printing industry. Those are two examples in the corporate world. And then when my son came along that I mentioned a minute ago, I had an opportunity to leave that corporate environment. Reporting to the board of directors in Tokyo was a pain with the time difference and being a young father. And so I resigned and took the contract payout I had the opportunity to take to start a publishing business. And then I started from scratch a small publishing business that I built in 20 years into the second largest tourism publishing business in California. That in 2014, after getting involved in the political reform movement of 3.5 years, I decided to sell that so that I could go to work full time and dedicate myself as a volunteer in this effort. So I sold that business in early 2014 after my employees couldn't buy it, come up with a down payment, which I'd offered it to them. And I sold it to an investment banker. 2 years later, we realized that the changes that he'd made after firing most of my staff and brought in these young people that he thought could do it, bankrupted it. And foolishly, in my earnest to do this reform work, I took back the paper and carried back the note, which was my wife's and my retirement. And so when we learned that he had bankrupted the company, we sued him and won this nice big, 7-digit settlement that was totally uncollectible. Then I had a choice: go back to the corporate world or figure out a way to stay in this effort, this fight to reform our government. And so my wife said, hey, I'll start dog sitting. And a friend of mine said, why don't you start driving Uber? So I chose to drive Uber. I drove over 4,000 rides for Uber. I spent nights in the parking lot at LAX so that I could stay in this effort. I conducted meetings for the Common Sense Party and others from every Whole Foods in Southern California and most of the Starbucks. But it allowed me to start and stop my day and stay in this effort, which has led me to today. And I'm grateful for that because it made me the man that I am, and it immersed me, took me from a position of being nothing more than a voyeur to the problems of what the vast majority of Americans had been, immersed me in the depths of what it was to go from a homeowner of 39 years to a renter and struggling to pay rent, to pay medical insurance, to buy gas, to pay food, because I didn't want to put on my family or any of my friends of our circumstances. That was for my wife and I to deal with. It was a choice we made, but we did, and we're here.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there a lot of times when you're dealing with like our elected officials, like you said, there's kind of a disconnect between the everyday person's life and what goes on with these guys in Washington D.C. And I think that that's where it's like, you having real life experience, fairly recently, gives you a unique perspective when it comes to like the struggle that we're all dealing with on a day-to-day basis as a result of the decisions that are coming out of Washington D.C. And I think that that's where it's like, for me, I'm looking at this, and I think I oftentimes have different priorities than a lot of other people in the Republican Party and conservatism and all that. But I'm looking at this like, okay, how do we actually make things affordable again? How do we actually preserve, our constitutional rights as we're heading into this new realm of like artificial intelligence? Because that's quickly become one of my biggest concerns now, is because you listen to guys like Elon Musk and Bill Gates who say that within the next decade, AI and robots are going to replace the entire workforce. And so it's like, so what do we do about that? And then we see in the big beautiful bill that they're going to, basically ban states from implementing regulations on artificial intelligence. So how do we both deal with this inflationary problem, but then also make it to where we're not going to be run out of a job and careers in this new world of artificial intelligence? How do we deal with that from your perspective?
Well, you touch on what's the most important thing that I will be working on of priorities, and that is how to immediately drive down the cost of living for people. And my wife and I want to back up for just a second. My wife and I were just talking yesterday when she met me, and I was in that very well off position of privilege. I never even looked at the price tag. She'd ask me, well, do you realize how much this costs? I said, no, how much? And she'd tell me, oh, okay. I never had to look at a price. I just bought what I wanted, and it didn't affect me because I was making significant income and had a fair amount of wealth. And now my wife, she even gets coupons. And we go to a Ruby's when we can get 2 entrees for one. So cost of living is the single most significant thing. In my district, our district, 4 out of 10 families have income insecurity that are struggling just to get by. And this is one of the wealthiest areas. And so many people in areas like Laguna Beach, Newport Beach, parts of Irvine and others, they don't even have to look at the prices. And we hear something from the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and they like to say, oh, inflation's down to only 3%, and last month it was only 4%. Well, when you're making a lot of money, that doesn't even affect you. You don't even know the difference if milk went up $1 or gas went down or up 50 cents. It doesn't affect you at all. But if you're on a fixed income, or you're working on a wage, or just struggling, for a family of 4, just to get by on a survival level, to afford a basic decent apartment for a family of 4, you have to have a combined income in the household of about $129,000 or more. And so if you're on $129,000 or less, or right there, when that inflation is 3%, again, last month it was 4%, and that really dramatically makes you make different choices. And so driving down the cost of living, and there's some really important things that the government can do to help work on lowering the inflation rate with the spending of government and being a good steward of our money. By the debt that we've taken on, that drives up interest rates, that drives up the cost of everything. You see what California government is doing with our gasoline, and the way they're, through regulations, are forcing gas companies to eliminate production in our own state. There are lots of things at the federal level that can be done. So that's one of my highest priorities.
Yeah, well, and I think that like for me too, it's like looking at this, like obviously we've got to. I think there's so many contributing factors, especially to the cost of living and inflation. Obviously, there's all the regulations that we put on, especially when it comes to energy, because that energy price affects every single industry you can possibly think of. So that's obviously a major thing that we're gonna have to deal with, and hopefully, we can get back to the way it was, when Trump's first round, when it was like we were kind of energy independent for at least a short period of time. But then as well, like you touched on, like we're dealing with out of control spending. Like we had the Doge cuts, but then we have, the big beautiful bill that doesn't really seem to implement a lot of those Doge cuts. So now we're dealing with, okay, so what was the point of this whole operation? And then now we're getting sucked into all these different kinds of wars where not only are we giving money to places like Ukraine and other countries, but then we're borrowing the money from places like China and other countries in order to add an interest. And then we give it to these other countries to fight these wars. Why aren't they just going and borrowing the money? If we have to borrow the money to give them, why don't they just go borrow the money themselves? And I think that there's so many different aspects of this, but one of the huge concerns is like, okay, this interest rate is going to outpace our income very, very quickly. Like, what the heck are we supposed to do about this? Because I feel like the legislative branch refuses to actually do anything significantly to deal with this.
Absolutely. And inflation is crushing the families. Wages aren't keeping up. The cost of everything from food to housing is skyrocketing. It's killing us. I encourage people to go to our website, Maxsenti, F-O-R, Congress.com. Go to my issues. I've chosen 4 immediate impact issues and 4 longer term issues to go to, and I go into some detail there. And then I think we've done over 60 TikTok videos and others, some of them or many of them touching on these things. But give you a couple of examples of what needs to be done. Most importantly, probably, is a debt to GDP cap, gross domestic product. We need to change the way we measure that, but that's for another conversation. We need to set maximum ratio limits to prevent further economic decline. We need to end the inflationary spending. We need to require impact review studies before passing any bill of spending money. And one of the things that Doge started on was these audits. We need full federal audits. We need to use AI-driven oversight to eliminate fraud and inefficiency. And every program, every year, like I did in business when I was running American Standard Division for Nissan, my own business for 20 years, zero-based budgeting, it's called. It's like, okay, if this department needs more money, first off, justify how you spent the money of the last budget and what you will do differently with this new money. And if your program is not working after a very reasonable period of time, 1 year, 2 years, 3, 5 at most, if it's not working, scrap the dang thing, redesign it from bottom up and change it. And one of the biggest problems with what we have, in my opinion, driving all this, besides the incentives are set up so poorly, is that we've got 70% of our congressional people are attorneys. Now, there may be, and if somebody knows one out there, I'd love to have them let me know, some attorney that's trained to be a mediator, but I don't know of any. So basically what these 70% of our legislature is made up of are attorneys. They're some of the brightest minds in our country, but at the same token, they are trained to be an advocate for a position. They're trained to win. They're trained how to manipulate the jury. They're trained to manipulate the witness, the judge, and public opinion. How to lie, how to hide facts, manipulate facts to do one thing, to win for their side. And their side, when we talk about politics, is a team called Democrats or Republicans. That's all they care about, is a win. They don't know, oh, by the way, we need to solve these problems. They just care about winning. And the other 30%, almost all, not all, but most all of them are nothing more than I was at one time, a voyeur, a well-intentioned voyeur to the problems at best. And their staffs are made up similarly. They've come out of elite backgrounds, privileged, or they came right out of being rich people that have made a lot of money doing some great creative things in business, and now they think they want to run the country, but they don't have a clue what that struggling family is, that mom who's going to work 2 jobs to provide for those kids, or that father who can't go to sleep at night because he's worried about how in the hell is he going to put food on the table for his family tomorrow. How is he going to pay rent next month? These are the kinds of income insecurities that they don't have a clue on, so they can go off and say, okay, gavel that meeting, we'll conduct another hearing next month, and the problems go on. All the while, they're sitting there self-enriching themselves through the corruption that we know with the insider trading. There's a whole list of things that they do. But the problems don't get solved because they have no incentive to solve them, and they don't have the connection to the community at a depth to understand the pain of those folks that are spending the next night in a tent with their children because they're homeless. And the biggest driver of homelessness is not what we're often told about drug abuse and that. Yes, that's a big driver of it. But the biggest driver of homelessness is bankruptcies from medical bills and trying to pay medical costs. That is the biggest driver of bankruptcy and homelessness in this country. We need to be dealing with root cause solutions, not putting band-aids on it and allowing problems to go on because they know an unsolved problem helps rile up their base and get them reelected. Because these career politicians, professional politicians, their first job is to get reelected. And how they do that is by supporting the leadership of a political party. And who controls the leadership of a political party? The moneyed interest behind them. They're not interested in solving the problems no matter what they say. And election cycle after election cycle, the American people trustingly go listen to these people running for office, and they tell them everything the polls have told them to say. They've got professional speech writers. They've got staffs that have come out of the same type of background who tell them all the things to say. They say all the right things, and what do? They go off to Washington and do what the leadership of their party and the money tells them to do. And we have to get people elected who not only understand the problems, who know how to approach a solution to those problems, but are also uncorruptible. People who are not going there to build a career. And I'm obviously open the door for young, innovative problem solvers who are committed to service. When you go into public service, it is service, not self-service.
Yeah, well, and it looks like the screen's pausing a little bit, but I think you're back now. But I think and you touched on it when it comes to like the especially the medical bankruptcies and the huge medical costs, and I think that like when you were talking about like how it's all this money that impacts the leadership of these parties. I always just call them the bigs. It's all the bigs, whether you're talking big pharma, big ag, big food, big banks, whatever it is. It's all the bigs that are kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes through their money and donations and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's also one of those things where it's like we've got things like the PrEP Act. We've got like Ronald Reagan's implementation of like vaccine manufacturers immunity, where a lot of people, especially after COVID, are like, okay, why are we allowing this to happen? Because we're getting hit with a lot of these medical bills and dealing with the after effects of let's say the COVID vaccines. And it's like, so what do we do if victims of this cannot actually hold accountable the perpetrators of the manufacturers of these vaccines and of these shots? And I think a lot of times, we look at Congress and they're looking at the origins of COVID, but I feel like they're not actually looking at the actual solutions to these problems for the victims of this massive rollout that was a combined effort of the government with these big pharmaceutical companies. So is there anything legislatively that we can do to actually provide either some relief or some protection to make sure that this kind of a thing never happens again?
Absolutely. And I want to touch on a couple of things that you said there. First and foremost, big money does control Washington. And for decades, our career politicians have lined their pockets while Americans have suffered. They refuse to pass such things as no congressional insider trading, which allows them and their families to profit off of the laws that they write. They ignore the Lifetime Congressional Integrity Act. They keep this revolving door to the lobbyists wide open. They reject the No Congressional Cronyism Act, ensuring that their families stay on corporate payrolls. There's a whole list of these kind of things that have been proposed year after year after year that never get passed. They just give lip service to them. And one of the things I want to point out to the audience is something that very few people are aware of. And I'm sure, Jeff, you and most of the audience watched some of those hearings to get people like Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard into office. In the Constitution, there's the speech and debate clause. And the speech and debate clause is why it says this. a member of Congress, which means the House of Representatives or our Senate, for those, just to make it clear, while they're speaking on the floor or they're in a congressional campaign, they can say anything and have total legal immunity. They cannot be charged for any slander or any of that. Nothing applies to them. When the founders created our great Constitution and designed this system, which is amazing, if we can get it back on track, and that's for later in the conversation. But this speech and debate clause in those days gave immunity because they wanted people to be able to be candid. They wanted people, just like when they were writing the Constitution, they sealed up the windows, didn't allow any of the 50, I think it was 52, 56 members of the Congressional caucus there doing that, to take notes even out. They wanted people to be able to speak candidly from their heart and be able to change their mind, change their perspective. But so they wrote that in. Now, our congressional people know that they can grandstand on the floor of the Senate or the House. They can grandstand in a hearing. They can sit up there when Kennedy was being interviewed for the Health and Human Services position, and they will make up bold-faced lies and stand there and put up statistics and all, which are nothing more than lies, because they know they have no legal recourse, none whatsoever. And then they take those sound bites and they flood out through social media instantly. Within minutes, it's out to millions of people. And now innocent people who are trying to trust their leadership go, well, wow, if Bernie Sanders said this, it must be true. He has access to the facts that I obviously don't have access to. He wouldn't be saying that in a congressional hearing if it wasn't true. Bobby Kennedy, you must be a despicable human being to have done that. And it's bull-faced lies. But then once it's out there, those people are locked in an echo chamber that they never get an opportunity to hear it from the other perspective, to know that that's a lie. You know, here's a man that was a hero of the planet on Vanity Fair's cover, on Time Magazine's cover, until he took on big pharma and the pharmaceutical industry, and then he became the devil incarnate. So speech and debate clause, people need to be aware of, is what they hide behind and use. And in today's modern time, that is something that somehow Congress needs to address. But obviously they're not going to do it until they get more independent thinking people committed to putting people, we the people, truly ahead of party and ahead of anything other than the Constitution. And I will go to Congress with unwavering commitment to maintain the integrity that I've built my lifetime reputation on in business and in the community, and will not allow myself to be corrupted by anything and anyone. I will take a knee only to God and our Constitution and no one else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I think also to kind of, piggyback off of that as well, and kind of take this in a slightly different direction. But I think that when we look at the rollout of dealing with the COVID jabs and big pharma and how they've handled everything, I think one of the big problems that we had with that entire rollout was this kind of, you could call it whatever you want, more socialistic, fascistic, kind of public-private partnerships, where you would have the government partnering and basically promoting a private business, which would be like Pfizer, Moderna. And we see this in a whole host of areas, whether you're talking about banking, whether you're talking about real estate, everywhere. This applies to so many different things, but I think it was so blatantly, patently obvious to so many people, this kind of partnership between the government and these private companies, where they saw massive, massive profits, and then the sales people and the advertisers were basically our own government that was paying to promote it and push it and all that kind of stuff. So then when we see a lot of these, vaccine injuries and that whole thing, it's like, I feel like our government has kind of turned a blind eye to those people. And I can't tell you how many people that I know that have had heart attacks or strokes or blood clots or myocarditis or neurological issues and things along those lines. And I feel like there's a growing frustration within a lot of the Kennedy supporters, where they feel like, okay, what are we doing about these people that they trusted the government when they said we're going to roll out the vaccine, get vaxxed, do this whole thing, and then now they're living with lifelong issues, and they feel like the government has kind of turned a blind eye to them and ignored the reality of them. And so what do we do for those people? And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of these people, and nobody's really coming to save their day. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. You touched on a number of things that I want to get back to. One is hydroxychloroquine. Another one, though, is what a lot of people, and this is something that my campaign, I'm trying to bring forth, is the understanding that our founders didn't create the perfect union, but they gave us a path towards one. And we need to get back on that path. We need to find that path towards that more perfect union. But we got to do it together. And one of the things that was exemplified in Lincoln's administration, that Kennedy and Trump coming together hopefully will exemplify more and more over time, is that need to work together. But truth is the key. And people say truth. Well, my truth is this. And I have podcasts that hopefully people, if they're interested in learning more about me, I have a podcast called Front and Center with Steve and Michael. And much of our theme is all about seeking the whole truth together. And Nelson Mandela gave us the perfect example in those horrific circumstances of South Africa and the incredible apartheid, what that did to people. But his approach was, which I recommend is our approach, is truth and reconciliation trials. Because soon as somebody thinks they're up for criminal trial charges, they will then take on that advocate, that attorney, who will do everything they've been trained to do, lie, cheat, etc., manipulate, to get them off. But if they're put up for trial that says, look, tell us the whole truth from your perspective, what happened and what you did for it, and you can go free. Don't lie to us, just tell us the truth. Let other people learn the truth, and then you can go on your way. We will strip you of the wealth that you might have earned through the corruptive acts you did. So you're not going to benefit from all those stock insider tradings and keep on that stocks that you made while you were doing that for Moderna or whatever. But short of taking away their wealth that was earned corruptly, they walk free. We need the truth. That will set people free. And a lot of people always say the truth will set you free, but the unfortunate part is they don't know the beginning of that famous biblical proverb or statement. It was when you know the Bible and you study that, then the truth will set you free. And so what we need is to learn from them what they did so that we can not repeat those mistakes. Their loss of respect in the community amongst their friends and family, that's enough punishment if we get the truth. So we need to solve the problems. We need to seek the truth together. And people say, well, everybody's truth is, your truth is different than mine. And one thing I want to comment on about that, it's important for people to understand when I seek the whole truth together. It's like I love to give the example. Almost everybody loves to watch sports of some kind. And baseball is one of my passions. And I coached it for a lot of years, had a club baseball team. That's for another discussion. But if you're at an Angel baseball game and you're sitting behind third base and there's a ball hit into right field, that guy's trying to stretch it into a double, the throw's made in, and from your seat, that throw was there easily in time. The runner was out, and the umpire calls him safe. And everybody stands up booing. How in the world could that umpire call him safe? And you see the first replay camera from home plate, the second replay camera from above there. You look at 2 or 3 camera angles in there, the guy was out. Everybody's screaming and upset. Then you get around to that fifth camera angle that was in left field looking down the line towards first base, and you realize that runner slid outside and the second baseman missed getting the tag on his hip by an inch. And the only one in that proper position to see that was the umpire and that camera and those people in that particular view. And he called him safe and was the right decision. I've seen an example of that watching a Super Bowl game. It was the ninth camera angle that showed that the ref on the field made the call. So when you seek the whole truth, people say you've got to have the curiosity to never stop taking the opportunity to listen and listen is the key word. Listen to what somebody else is saying and what is it that they might be seeing that's different than what I see. And then together, if you share what you're each seeing, but you share the goal of where you want to go, now you can start to work together to solve it. So having curiosity and being willing to listen to each other is at the core of bringing us together so that we can solve these significant challenges of our time and move our country through this period of time, which leads me to what is going on right now that everyone sees is this horrific immigration issue. And I'll be coming out with it in our newsletter that we're about to launch in the next couple of weeks. It's important for people on this immigration issue is a perfect example of the seeking the whole truth. First and foremost, they need to understand is in 1986, I believe it was, or 88, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, through a joint bipartisan bills that came out of our Congress under Tip O'Neill's leadership, and Reagan signed it in law, very comprehensive immigration reforms that has had minimal parts of it at best ever even implemented. These parties knew that good immigration policies, which I like to define similarly to what Bobby said, high walls with wide gates, and an immigration policy that allows people in, but keeps people out until we know who they are and can regulate that. But our Congress, which is at the core of the problems, has done a terrible, abysmal job of stewarding our budgets, handling these immigration issues and the issues of war and all of this. But this issue of immigration is crucial because they've never dealt with it in a way that's effective, allowing fentanyl, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and something that people hardly ever talk about is the exploitation of labor. By having those immigrants come in here who are undocumented, so they can't go to the resources or the police. So immigration right now is huge. So we need to have people understand there's a labyrinth of laws between city, county, state, and federal immigration laws and criminal laws that create a web of difficulty when we have good, hardworking, not hardworking, because everybody, good, caring people want to go out and protest. What they see is the inhumane treatment of many of their friends and neighbors who they have known for years. And at the other side of the coin says, yeah, but they've broken the law. Yes, they have some. But again, we know it keeps us distracted from going to the deeper issue. Instead of looking at your perspective on the immigration issue and my perspective and battling to each other in destructive protests that how they get destructive is another part of the discussion. We need to say to each other, what was the core reason? Why in the heck do we have this issue in the first place? It's because our government and those we elect have abrogated their responsibilities to it. And we need to then say to each other, how can we compassionately, quickly solve this problem? And recognize that the vast majority of those protesters on either side of the issue are good people trying to, from their perspective, to solve it from their perspective, which unfortunately has been purposefully used to divide us. And so immigration is a huge issue that must be solved.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think the immigration issue is one of those things that I think it really gets down to the core root problem of what's actually going on in Washington D.C., where neither side actually wants to solve the problem. Like
Right.
because it's a phenomenal fundraising tool by both parties to go back to their constituents and raise money to fight against the other side's boogeyman. And I think that's so what we're seeing happen right now is both sides are just talking past each other because the leadership does not want to provide a
Hell
solution
no.
at all. And I think that the more that people can understand that and realize that, well, maybe what we need to do is the Republican, everyday people, because the leadership clearly isn't going to do it. But the Republican side needs to come and say, look, here's our concerns, here's our issue. The Democrat side needs to say, here's our concerns, here's our issue. And then the reality is the solution in a democratic republic, in a constitutional republic. Our founding fathers set it up to where there's going to be a compromise, but the question is, what kind of compromise are you going to come to? Because you have to have consensus if you're actually going to pass something, which means you have to listen to each other's concerns and then come to some sort of agreement. But the way that things are set up right now and the way that our leadership is set up right now, I don't really foresee a real solution coming in because neither side really wants to fix the problem.
Yeah, and this disconnect, I want to go further in that for our audience because it's important to understand this use of, from the Republican, quote, conservative side, which again, I go back to Bush and Cheney hijacked it and those others who told us they were all about shrinking government bullshit. But this disconnect that started happening in 1975, and there's a very clear date on that, which was from a letter from either the attorney or the president or both of the National Chamber of Commerce. At that time, we used to have a tension between labor and management and ownership. And when I got into the corporate world, the average CEO of a public held company was 17 times that of its average wage earner. Today, it's off the charts 400, 500, and in some cases 1,000 times what their average worker is. And that's part of what the Republican leadership allowed to happen, was the exploitation of this labor. They knew by allowing that, even though whatever they said is irrelevant because they didn't want to deal with it, because that helped these corporations keep the cost of labor, drive it down, keep it low. And so this disconnect started. And up until 1975, there was a direct parallel of the growth of our economy was being shared equally. That's how we built the middle class. As productivity went up, the profits was shared between labor and ownership class, management class, and it paralleled for all the years since World War II. 1975, decoupled, and with adjusted for inflation, almost 100% of the growth of our economy and the increase from productivity have been owned by the ownership and management class, and labor has been flat. And that's why it has destroyed the middle class. And we were talking earlier about lowering the impact, things that would help raise the standard of living. And one of them is to this allowance of this labor to drive down labor wages so that management and ownership class could get 100% of the gain of this productivity. So this is a huge part of the problem, is immigration that never gets talked about. They just want us pitted against each other so that they can go off and do what they've been doing. And they tell us all the time what they're going to do, and it doesn't happen.
Oh yeah, definitely, and we'll kind of wrap up here in just a minute. But I wanted to, kind of highlight a particular point because I think there's a couple different things that are attributing to what you're talking about. I think it's really important. Obviously, you've got illegal immigration, which drives wages down because a lot of times you have the illegal immigrants that come in and will do work for less money than what an American would do,
Yeah.
or even sometimes legally it could accept because of minimum wage laws, depending on which state you're
Right.
in, and the whole deal. So
Right.
so that side of things, it's an unfair advantage. Then you deal with like China and foreign countries that basically implement slave labor, which again undercut the American worker, right? So there's a lot of different contributing factors from there. But then when you're looking historically, and you were talking about the difference between like CEOs and the average wage worker, I think another important thing is that we've become very reliant over the last several decades upon basically training our kids in the education system to go get a job
Oh,
and work for a big corporation, which then means you're basically our entire education system is set up to train employees to go work for somebody else. And I think another contributing factor to why the wage gap was much closer together is because more people own their own business, 50 years ago, 60 years ago,
oh yeah,
70 years
great
ago,
point.
to where there wasn't as many big corporations as there are now, because now we're just pumping them out in our education system. They graduate, you go get a job, you work your way up, you're hopping around from big business to big business. And it's like, well, yeah, because these big corporations and these big CEOs, they're just gobbling up all the wealth. They're buying up all the small companies, and there's not as many small businesses and small business CEOs. And I think
Oh,
that's another thing that we're going to have to deal with as a society.
huge. That's a huge issue. You drive around the streets, even in Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, and you see the boarded up businesses, uh, and yet the big chains and stuff are growing like crazy. Something you touched on earlier in the conversation, I want to get back to, which is AI and education that you
Yeah.
just brought up. We didn't go to. I've been studying this issue of the impact of AI for many years, 10, 12 years. And it's now finally gotten to the point, and Andrew Yang did a good job of trying to make people aware of it when he was running for president in 2020.
Mhm.
And it goes back before that. And I encourage people to go read a book called Crisis 2038 that came out probably 10 years ago. But it talks about this issue of AI and what the government can do. And it really gives people, and it's done in a great way. And I encourage either reading it or listening to it in an audible book. But AI, the impact of it, is stripping millions of jobs away from industry after industry. And there's a couple of things about that. First and foremost, when you rely on AI, like I use ChatGPT a lot, but I'm very aware of the algorithms that are written for it are helping manipulate my thinking in a particular direction. And so you have to be really careful and have enough knowledge and critical thinking skills to challenge it and ask for its resources. Go provide separate set of resources. Go research that, and then have enough knowledge and willingness to go out and search on your own if it's something important, because the algorithms are manipulating your thinking. And people think, oh, ChatGPT said it, or where the other AI services, so it must be true. Bullshit. It's not necessarily true. It's what whoever wrote those algorithms want you to think is true by the sources they choose to get the information they provide for you. So, in education, our District 47 is one of the most privileged, best districts for education in the state for sure, and I'm sure one of the better ones in the country. But with that, to the jobs, the recognition of the need for skilled craftspeople, because that's where AI will have the least impact on, is skilled labor. And so we need to treat skilled labor with the same ease and grants and things to help encourage people to go in. If you've got talent, it comes to mind as a little thing my dad said to me when I was 16 years old, as I was out swearing to myself trying to change the oil and filter in my first car. And he comes out and he shakes his head, this little quiet Italian dad. He was sweet and great father. But he says to me, son, thank goodness the good Lord gave you the ability to speak. Because if you had to make your living with your hands, you'd starve to death. He was so right. I didn't know it at the time, but he was so right. But we need to treat these kinds of educational people to go and get real hands-on training to be great electricians, carpenters, plumbers, work with their hands. There's so many great jobs out there. Those folks are in dire need, who can actually build things with their hands. All I could ever do was write a good check, while I watch these people, and encouraging the arts, which help bring joy and beauty into the world. We need to treat those differently. Right here in Orange County, we have a great school, OSHA, the School of the Arts, Orange County School of the Arts, that we need to support and bring back art into all the schools to help encourage that. But education right now, I encourage people to go beyond being taught to be a good worker. We need to go back to teaching people how to be good critical thinkers, how to think for themselves. There's a lot of really good schools in Orange County for people to educate their children at besides the public schools. And hopefully, if enough pressure is put on the public schools and we can change the regulations there, we can change and make our public schools creative, innovative centers of learning again, just like it's going on in the private sector. So we need not to just disparage the public schools. We need to help build them up while we help all people have a better choice for education and lift everyone's educational opportunities up.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Now, for people that they want more information from you or want to support your campaign or anything along those lines, tell them how to do that, how to get more plugged in with what you're working on.
All right. Well, I'd like to shamelessly do what's the most difficult thing I was told by two wonderful congresspeople that gave me some deep advice. They said the hardest thing for you to do, Maxsenti, is going to be to ask people for their help and a donation. When I was one of the major fundraisers for Children's Hospital of Orange County for 14 years, it was an easy ask. When I was asking people to allow my publishing business or my printing company to take on their project, I had a great product. Now I have to become the product. And all the teachings about being humble, you have to flip that and say, I have to do now what must be done to lift up my campaign, to create the credibility. So I'm asking people to go to Maxsenti4Congress.com, and I need donations. Right now, we're at the stage where we need donations. We don't need a lot. We're not going to compete dollar for dollar, but what I do need is enough donations. We've got the first month. We just launched the campaign 2 weeks ago. Our first month's goal was $20,000. We're about halfway there, so that we can bring on a couple of incredible volunteers who've been working for and with me for 4 months for free to be able to give them a stipend so that they don't have to struggle with their own income and have jobs, paying jobs. So I need people to be willing to go to Maxsenti4Congress.com, make a donation. And if it's all you can do is give up a Starbucks of $5, that's okay. If it's $25, that'll help boost one of our TikTok or Instagram videos to as many as 5,000 more people. But if you don't have the cash, if you're one of those people like many struggling with that, offer your time, your contacts. Those things are equally as valuable. So give what you can and recognize that all are essential and needed and appreciated. So it's Maxsenti4Congress.com. I'm running here in the 47th district, but you don't have to be in my district to vote if you to help. If you live anywhere and can hear this message and you like what I'm saying and you think that you can trust me to go to Congress and be part of that necessary group of uncorruptible politicians, I hate to use that term on myself, but uncorruptible representatives to pass the kind of legislation necessary to give us good stewardship of our resources, to codify the necessary changes that Bobby and others are trying to make in our government. That needs to be codified. We need people there who will work together. There's people like Senator Johnson, Thomas Massey, and others, but not a lot of them, and we need a lot more support, and you can help us. So if you're anywhere in the country and want to help, you can still donate and help me in many ways. I'd appreciate all the help you can give me. I've never ran for public office before, and I've got a long journey ahead.
Well, yeah, definitely. And I've got the link in the show notes, guys. You guys can just click on that. You can go over there and I'll follow up with an article. You guys, again, the link will be in there. You guys can go over there, see how you can help support or get involved, especially if you guys are locally out here in Orange County. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective and your take. We'll definitely have you back on again sometime as the campaign progresses along, because there's so many different things to talk about that we barely even touched on. So but I appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate it. And thank you for all who are listening.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And then everybody else as well. Again, make sure you guys are going over to his website. You guys can donate. You guys can get involved and all that. Make sure you guys are voting for the right people. Again, like he mentioned people like in the vein of Rand Paul and Thomas Massey. We need more people like that are actually going to be principled, that aren't going to cave to party politics. So make sure you guys are supporting the right kind of candidates. The best time to do that is dealing with primaries. so important to deal with the primaries. So make sure that you guys are doing that. 2 things as we're closing. Again, go over to pickaxe.com, PICKAX.com. Sign up today. Again, constitutionally protected free speech social media platform. Make sure you guys are going over there. And then also, if you guys do want to deal with protecting yourselves, dealing with inflation, and start earning some cash back, go to jeffdornik.com/cash. Sign up for Rakuten today. You guys can start getting some amazing deals and earn cash back on all of your online shopping. So make sure you guys are doing that at jeffdornik.com/cash. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I truly, truly appreciate it. We shall catch you guys next time.